The world tends to celebrate the loud, the visible, the instantly recognized achievements. Yet, God's work often unfolds far from the spotlight's glare, in silence and stillness. Imagine that the true miracles might be quietly taking shape in those moments you've dreaded. The times when you feel invisible, overlooked, or abandoned. When every prayer seems to fade, unanswered, and every opportunity appears to be closed shut. What if that very silence is not a void, but rather a sacred workshop where God is patiently crafting strength, molding your character, and igniting purpose, a preparation for something greater that remains unseen to others for now. This journey isn't about immediate recognition or public applause. It's about a profound inner transformation, one so deep and silent that when the moment arrives, you will step into it not to seek acclaim, but to serve with authority, tranquility, and unwavering faith. There is a place, quiet and solitary, where God labors without witnesses. No cheers break the silence. No acknowledgement interrupts the process. It is the desert, a place far more intentional than it may feel. God doesn't lead a chosen woman into this solitude to diminish her light, but to strip away the noise that once shaped her identity. In this secluded space, distractions fall away, and what remains is the raw truth of her heart. The desert is less about public loss, and more about what God gains access to privately. Life simplifies here, pared down to its essence. Each day unfolds with repetitive, sometimes stark simplicity. Waking, working, praying, sleeping, then starting all over again. Prayer in this place often feels dry and unremarkable. Slow, emotionless flow of words, without immediate comfort or reassurance. Yet, this is precisely where faith deepens and matures. When obedience no longer hinges on feelings of inspiration, God watches for something far more valuable. Consistent faithfulness, even as silence grows. Within, an internal battle rages. Old habits and instincts resurface, whispering that being seen equates to worth. The tug to return to noise and visibility can seem not only reasonable, but even spiritual. At least there, I was useful. The whispers say, at least there, I mattered. However, usefulness built without depth inevitably falters under pressure. The Spirit gently reveals this truth, that visibility does not equal genuine growth or strength. What may feel like isolation is in truth a protective insulation for the vital work taking place beneath the surface. Frustration sometimes turns inward, breeding doubt. Questions linger deeply through the night, heavy and unresolved. Pride slyly suggests shortcuts on the journey back to significance. I can do this on my own, it murmurs, cleverly disguised as wisdom. But God refuses to rush this formation because vessels hastened into shape tend to crack and fail prematurely. The desert slows her, not out of cruelty but to safeguard her future. God's hand here is both deliberate and often challenging. Like a potter working clay, he presses upon areas she has guarded for years. Excess is removed. Weak structures are dismantled. It may feel like starting anew, and indeed, that is the point. What cannot endure pressure is not destined for glory. Each silent adjustment strengthens what will one day be revealed openly. Slowly, yet surely, a change takes place. Not necessarily in her external circumstances, but in her perception and understanding. She begins to grasp that being visible is not the true measure of purpose or progress. The unseen growth in the silence carries a power that will uphold her when she steps into the light. The sense of being unseen hasn't lessened her value. Instead, it has brought her clarity. The lack of external validation has honed her reliance solely on God. Without realizing the exact moment it happened, she has stopped measuring herself by the reactions or recognition of others. The desert remains quiet, yet it no longer feels empty. Silence has a unique way of stripping away titles before it even reaches one's purpose. As the noise diminishes, the voices that once shaped her self-image gradually fall silent. Family expectations, old labels, and comparisons she never saw. Even the urge to prove herself spiritually slowly loses its hold. In that stillness, she becomes aware of just how dependent she was on feedback to define herself. Without it, she feels vulnerable, almost undefined, as if the script she had memorized no longer applies. At first, the disappearance of those external voices brings discomfort. She no longer knows how to present herself, with no audience to impress, no role to perform, and no energy left to maintain appearances. What remains is a sincere, worn-out version of herself. Human, fragile, and real. That reality feels perilous, because without the performance, she fears disappointing God, when in truth, God is finally meeting her without any pretense. This is where the crisis deepens. She wants to pray, but words seem inadequate. She wants to explain herself to God, but language fails her. Like Hannah at the temple, her prayer becomes raw emotion without form. A flood of tears instead of sentences, silence in place of clarity. Yet heaven understands. God listens not to the eloquence of prayer, but to its authenticity. He hears that which the heart cannot put into words. In these private moments, isolation feels louder than expected. The phone lies face down, messages go unanswered, and the urge to compare softly fades. Yet anxiety attempts to fill the void. She feels compelled to prove something, to show progress, to validate her calling. But every effort at performance feels hollow. God isn't asking for proof. He is removing the need for it. Slowly, something profound begins to unfold. Free from the pressure to impress, she starts hearing a different voice. Not the loud one demanding results, but the steady voice affirming relationship. God does not redefine her by her calling or tasks. He defines her by belonging. Daughter, known, seen, and secure. Her identity shifts from achievement to adoption, and that shift transforms everything. This internal journey is quiet yet powerful. When her identity is rooted in God, criticism loses its sting, and praise no longer holds control. She no longer depends on constant affirmation to remain steady. Her worth becomes unshakable. The silence that once felt threatening now acts as a shield, guarding the truth forming within her. Have you ever noticed how unsettling it is when the foundations that once defined you collapse? What were the voices that shaped your sense of self before the silence? And what might God be trying to communicate now that those voices have faded away? Waiting becomes the place where urgency quietly dies. For this chosen woman, that death feels deeply personal. She carries promises in her heart, and amidst the stillness, her true worth comes into view. There are moments when the heart clings to prayers penned years ago, times when God's voice felt unmistakably clear. Yet, days turn into weeks, and weeks into months, while outwardly, nothing seems to shift. Silence stretches wide between what we hope for and the reality we face, prompting a hard, aching question to rise within. If God truly loves me, why does it take so long? This tension isn't a mere idea or theory. It's deeply emotional, constantly present, and utterly draining. In these quiet seasons, impatience tiptoes in subtle but persistent ways. She finds herself returning to old notes, rereading words once held tightly, and silently checking dates that have long since passed. The temptation to step in and help God speed things along grows strong, often disguised as an act of faith. Taking action feels safer than waiting. Moving forward seems productive, yet rushing, without clear direction, more often leaves regret than fulfillment in its wake. God's timing feels almost painfully slow, almost as if mocking our human urgency. But He isn't reacting to our pressure. Instead, He's responding to a greater purpose. Imagine a seed tucked deep beneath the earth. On the surface, it appears lifeless, just soil and darkness. Yet beneath, all the hidden work required for new life is already underway. Roots are growing quietly, unseen, preparing before any sprout dares to break through. And these roots, they demand time. This silence becomes a learning ground. She discovers how to obey even when she doesn't understand, and to trust God even when no timeline appears. Much like Abraham stepping forward with incomplete information, she learns faith doesn't mean clear answers, but rather surrender. Waiting transforms from passive resignation into a dynamic trust, a daily choice to obey without immediate reward. This kind of faith reshapes what matters and resets her expectations. Emotionally, this time reveals control issues she never recognized. She notices how deeply her peace had depended on outcomes rather than God's presence. Letting go feels unnatural and scary at first. Anxiety rushes in, attempting to fill the emptiness left by lost certainty. Gradually, however, rest replaces striving. Not because answers flood in, but because her dependence on God grows deeper. God isn't slowing her down to frustrate her. Instead, He's removing her hurry, because hurry fractures clarity and sound judgment. What He's preparing her to carry cannot withstand impatience. This silence isn't a pause or a hiccup in her journey. It's essential training. Each day spent waiting is molding the way she will walk when the awaited moment finally dawns. Have you noticed how waiting reveals your true source of trust? Which promise feels delayed in your life right now? And might God be protecting you from rushing into something unready? Take a moment, pause, reflect on this season of silence that God might be using to shape you at this very moment. Share below one way God is quietly working in your life. I'd love to hear your story. When the world grows quiet outside, the noise inside can grow deafening. Without the distractions of life, old memories surface, unresolved pain whispers anew, and persistent thoughts spin over and over. The battle shifts from outward conflicts to an internal fight, relentless and unyielding. The mind becomes a battleground, replaying scenes once thought buried deep, whispering doubts long hoped to be silent, interrogating truths once embraced without question. Thoughts may even begin to accuse, but in this silence, a deeper, transformative journey unfolds. Quietly and persistently, the struggle unfolds. You're not the chosen one. You're the forgotten. If God truly cared, this pain wouldn't be so sharp. These voices don't scream, they whisper. They creep in late at night, come with the dawn, and linger between prayers. Because no one else hears them, their burden feels unbearably heavy. Fighting an enemy that no one else can see demands a special kind of strength, one forged in secrecy. Sleep becomes unpredictable. Night stretches out longer than it should. She lies awake, trapped in a cycle of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Anxiety doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives as restlessness, mental exhaustion, or emotional numbness. The idea of giving up crosses her mind, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly slipping away while no one's looking. At this point, the word becomes more than inspiration. It becomes her defense. She learns to respond to her thoughts instead of entertaining them. Scripture transforms into a weapon, no longer just a quote. Like donning armor piece by piece, she battles the lies with truth. Even when her hands tremble, she writes verses on mirrors, whispers prayers through trembling fear, and holds her ground without feeling strong. There are times when faith feels fragile, when confidence is replaced by sheer endurance. But staying the course matters. Choosing not to quit matters. God isn't disappointed by shaky obedience. He honors it in this hidden war. He's not aiming to build emotional highs. He's building mental resilience. Stability that isn't dependent on circumstances, but develops over time. Then, something shifts. Negative thoughts don't vanish overnight, but their power fades. Fear no longer controls the story. She starts recognizing lies more quickly and rejecting them sooner. The silence that once amplified the battle now becomes the space where truth rings louder. The mind, once chaotic, begins to find peace. What thoughts have spoken the loudest in your quietest moments? Which have you allowed to go unquestioned? For a long time, I lived in that very season of silence. I read, prayed, and sought, but still felt something was missing, like I lacked direction. It was during this time that what I now call the divine code was born, not as a product, but as a guide. It's a structured journey from Genesis to Revelation, featuring over 170 visual outlines that reveal connections you might never have noticed before, along with a 30-day devotional designed to build spiritual consistency. There are several bonus resources crafted to support the journey in a practical way. I created this for those who desire more than an emotional response to the Word. They want to truly grasp what God is building in every season of life. You'll find the link in the pinned comment below, but this special access, complete with all the bonuses, won't last forever. If you feel this is your moment to go deeper, this may be the right tool for your season. Now, let's return to what God still wants to reveal here. There's a moment in this silent process when God's work stops feeling hidden and begins to feel personal. It's the season of pruning. Unexpected things begin to fall away. Relationships she once prayed over, plans that felt right and even godly, and environments where she once found safety and affirmation. At first, the loss isn't dramatic. It's subtle, unsettling, and profoundly confusing. Her initial response is resistance. Why this? Why now? These weren't bad things. Some were blessings, some answers to prayers long ago spoken. The pain comes from not understanding why God would take away what appeared to be working. It feels contradictory, even unfair. She questions herself. Did I do something wrong? Did I misunderstand God's voice? Has obedience led not to reward, but to loss? Emotionally, this season reduces life. Circles shrink, options dwindle. What was once vibrant now seems bare. She notices how much comfort she drew from certain people, roles, and dreams. Without them, old doubts and insecurities resurface. Dependence stands exposed. God isn't just removing, He's revealing what these people and things were holding together. The silence magnifies the pain. No explanations come, no timelines to cling to. Just the quiet truth that pruning always looks destructive before it shapes productivity. Like the vine's branches cut back, what is removed isn't worthless, but restrictive. God isn't punishing. He's protecting the space for what will grow next. Slowly, amidst the grief, clarity dawns. She begins to see how some attachments kept her small, how emotional dependence masqueraded as loyalty, how validation hid behind calling. God's removing isn't harm. It's liberation from unnecessary burdens she had learned to carry. This pruning reshapes her trust. She learns that love for God must go deeper than love for outcomes. Faith cannot hinge on comfort. What remains after cutting is leaner, but stronger. Less crowded, but more focused. God isn't emptying her life. He's preparing it to bear fruit that lasts. What has God removed from your life that still puzzles you? Could it be that this loss is actually protection in disguise? There's a kind of prayer that feels invisible. Not even to the one praying is it seen. No applause, no stories to share, no witnesses to testify later. It happens in quiet rooms behind closed doors when faith loses its excitement and boils down to sheer choice. This is not the prayer that sparks emotion, but the kind that tests loyalty, showing up when nothing seems to change. In this season, prayer feels different. Words come slowly. Expectations simmer low. She kneels, rises, paces, then sits again, wondering if heaven hears. The familiar warmth is gone, replaced by a silence heavy with uncertainty. Yet she keeps praying, not because it feels powerful, but because stopping feels worse. Here, faith isn't fueled by feeling. It's driven by commitment. The struggle deepens when comparison creeps in. Others seem to thrive, to testify, to celebrate breakthroughs. Sometimes, breakthroughs don't come as expected. Meanwhile, her prayers feel unanswered, ordinary, even faint. Doubt creeps in, whispering that something must be wrong. Maybe she missed a step, or perhaps God has moved on. But the deeper, quieter truth is different. God isn't ignoring her prayers. Instead, he is shaping the one who is praying. Just like Jesus in Gethsemane. This prayer wrestles honestly with surrender. She offers her will, not polished or perfect, but raw and real. If there is another way, her struggle is genuine, unresolved, and fierce. Still, she stays. She refuses to flee from the tension between her desires and obedience. This tension is where character is forged, and where trust becomes authentic rather than rehearsed. There is no immediate breakthrough, but something inside her shifts. Urgency gives way to perseverance. Obedience grows steadier. Prayer stops being about control. It transforms into communion. She begins to understand that God's presence doesn't depend on her emotions. He is near, even when she feels absolutely nothing. This quiet faithfulness builds authority, but not the kind that demands attention. Rather, the kind that carries substantial weight. God answers these prayers by forming in her depth, patience, and discernment. What grows here will withstand pressure later. Nothing in this hidden room of prayer is wasted, even if no one ever acknowledges it. Have you stayed faithful in prayer when no visible emotional reward came? If so, consider what God might be building in you through that perseverance. Then, at some point in the silence, God invites her into a different kind of fast. Not from food, but from noise, opinions, comparisons, and endless input. At first, it seems simple, nearly unnecessary. Yet once she begins, she realizes how addicted she was to constant stimulation. The ceaseless flood of voices had filled spaces she was afraid to face. Removing all the noise exposes what was waiting all along to be healed. The first days are uncomfortable. The quiet feels almost too loud. Without constant updates, messages, and background sound, her thoughts bubble up unpredictably. Old insecurities speak loudly. Unresolved questions rise again. She instinctively reaches for distractions, not because she needs them, but out of habit. This fast isn't just about discipline. It's about confrontation. God is gently removing hidden crutches she leaned on without realizing it. Emotionally, withdrawal is real. She feels disconnected, even guilty for stepping back. There's pressure to explain herself, to justify the silence. But God isn't asking for explanations. He's asking for attention. In this absence of external noise, she begins to see how much internal chaos was fueled by comparison and opinions. As days pass, a subtle shift happens. The volume inside her lowers. Her thoughts become clearer. Her prayers more honest. Without outside interference, discernment sharpens. God's voice that once competed with so many now stands alone. Not louder, but unmistakable. Peace replaces urgency. Clarity replaces confusion. This quiet reveals a hard truth. The noise she feared losing had shaped her identity more than she admitted. Approval mattered too much. Vision blurred. But now, free from the overwhelming noise, she begins to discover her true self and the steady guidance only God can provide. She felt the pull of necessity, a deep need that only God could see and understand. Yet rather than condemning her for this inner struggle, God chose to heal it gently. Imagine him removing the microphone from her grasp, symbolically taking away the constant demand for performance and approval, and leading her back to the altar, a place where worth isn't negotiated or earned, but freely given. This fast she undertakes isn't a permanent exile from others, but a deliberate reordering of her connection to them. When she returns, she is stronger, more grounded, and less reactive. What once overwhelmed her now flows through, without exerting control over her spirit. The silence she embraced did not diminish her. Instead, it anchored her firmly in new strength. So now, consider what noise God might be asking you to step away from. What distractions or pressures, and what fresh clarity awaits on the other side of that obedience. Loneliness in these silent seasons feels distinctly different. It is more than simply missing people. It is the exposure of deep needs laid bare. Conversations become fewer, invitations slow, messages go unanswered. In that quiet space, something uncomfortable stirs. She begins to recognize how heavily her emotional stability once depended on others consistently showing up. The silence itself does not cause her pain. Rather, it unveils wounds that have long been hidden. Initially, she reaches out more, clings to delayed replies, rereads old messages seeking reassurance. But when these comforts fail to arrive, the sting of rejection feels personal. Quiet questions whisper in her heart. Did I do something wrong? Did I become forgettable? This loneliness presses on corners of her heart, never fully healed. And it is here, in this raw vulnerability, where the true test begins. God isn't removing her friends or connections to isolate her, but to distinguish genuine connection from unhealthy dependence. She gradually realizes some relationships were bearing emotional weight they were never meant to carry. What once seemed like love was sometimes survival. What appeared as loyalty was often a fear of being alone. Like Ruth stepping out without a safety net, she chooses faith over familiarity. Maintaining faithfulness without comfort demands courage. Day by day, she learns to sit quietly with God, without distractions or substitutes. Their conversations grow more honest. Her worship becomes softer and more intimate. The ache inside doesn't vanish completely, but it stops dictating her choices or defining her reality. Some of the deepest healing God performs happens quietly, away from public applause or applause-worthy moments. No altar calls or instant testimonies reveal this transformation. It unfolds silently, unnoticed by those around her. Old memories resurface suddenly and with unexpected weight. Moments she believed, resolved now, demand fresh attention. This season can feel unsettling because it disrupts her crafted image of strength. She's been skilled at functioning, smiling and moving forward while avoiding certain pains. Yet God now invites her to slow down, to honestly face those hurts. Childhood words that wounded her, past failures that still sting, trust broken and never fully restored. The easy temptation might be to ignore these pains and push on. But the Spirit gently calls her back again and again to the source of all healing. Progress here depends on vulnerability without the constant need for external validation. She cries when no one else is watching, pours out prayers that will never reach human ears, and sometimes utters forgiveness aloud, even when her emotions lag behind her obedient heart. Other times, she simply sits quietly, allowing God to touch and soothe the places that hurt most. This sacred, private work reshapes her from within, preparing her to emerge renewed and whole. She carries wounds that have never been voiced, delicate yet sharply defined. God moves with quiet patience. There's no rush in his work. At times she questions the timing. Why now? Why reopen these old scars? It might be simpler to keep moving, to avoid stirring the past. But God's aim isn't a fragile piece sewn over fractures. He wants to rebuild the base layers. Unhealed pain seeps into what comes next, influencing her choices, her relationships, her very sense of self. God works to heal from the root, not just to mask the symptoms. Gradually, a subtle lightness begins to emerge. Triggers lose their sharp edge. Memories that once dictated her responses start to quiet. In their place grows a steady calm, replacing the emotional storms. This healing is quiet, almost unseen, yet undeniably real. She isn't just pretending to be whole anymore. She is becoming whole. God's hand in this process is like a precise surgeon's, meticulous and unseen, mending wounds from deep within. What he repairs in secret will one day uphold her openly. This healing doesn't shout. It grants freedom, a freedom that shifts how she faces whatever lies ahead. Then, in one silent moment, something changes in how she relates to others. A subtle but profound shift. She finds the energy to stop explaining herself to everyone, not from anger or withdrawal, but because something deep inside has settled. The desperate need to be understood loosens its grip. Before this season, she felt compelled to clarify everything. Her choices, her boundaries, her transformation. She longed for people to see her heart and understand her intentions. Misunderstandings felt like failures, and silence stung like rejection. Yet, the longer she walks with God in those hidden places, the clearer it becomes. Not everyone is meant to understand a journey they were never invited on. This realization isn't easy. Old reflexes flare with questions. Why are you different? What's happening with you? The urge to defend herself returns, stirring tension between protecting her peace and justifying her path. Yet in these moments, she chooses restraint over reaction. Like Jesus, who stood silent before unjust accusations, she learns that not every question demands an answer. Some explanations drain strength, but bring no clarity. God becomes her advocate, the one she trusts to defend what he is shaping inside her. Silence, once feared, turns into a sacred boundary. Emotionally, this brings unexpected freedom. The burden of seeking approval lifts. She no longer feels responsible for managing how others see her. Her focus narrows to obedience, not appearances. Peace replaces anxiety. Confidence quiets but deepens. Others' opinions no longer steer her course. This maturity transforms her. Her words become fewer but more deliberate. Her responses are measured, no longer impulsive. She no longer chases to correct every misunderstanding. God is teaching her that being led by him matters more than seeking validation from people. That clarity in her relationship with God far outweighs the need for others' comprehension. Have you ever felt the heavy pressure to explain yourself repeatedly? To chase approval at the cost of your own peace? This is the journey she is on. A path to freedom rooted in trust, silence, and steadfast healing. Have you ever wondered what would happen if, instead of trying to control every detail, you simply trusted God to take the reins? Pressure has its own way of revealing truths that celebration never could. At this point in her journey, the weight pressing down feels heavier than ever before. Her responsibilities multiply, but remain hidden from view. Expectations grow louder, yet acknowledgement stays silent. She stretches herself thin, tested constantly, sometimes overwhelmed, and quietly, a question begins to echo deep within her heart. Why does this burden feel so immense if God is the one guiding me? What she hasn't realized yet is that this waiting period is not a punishment, but a time of preparation. There are moments when tears spill just before she has to show up, not to perform, but to serve. Fear whispers cruel doubts, telling her she's unready and lacking what's required. Still, obedience tugs her forward, urging her to say yes, even while uncertainty clings tightly. She steps into the moment, small, and here's where her calling shifts from a mere idea into tangible reality. Reality, as it turns out, is rarely soft. God doesn't anoint comfort. He anoints depth. Just like oil pressed from olives under intense pressure, what flows out now carries true substance. The pressure she endures is extracting something pure: patience, authority, discernment, compassion. None of these are learned in haste, and none come without a cost. The silence ensures the growth is genuine, not rehearsed. Emotionally, this season humbles her. Confidence no longer bloomed from certainty, but from a deep trust. She learns to lean on God moment by moment, not just in her grand vision, but in every step of execution. Strength becomes quiet, yet steady. Presence quietly replaces performance. She carries peace into every room, no longer trying to control the scene. Others may not immediately see the process, but they feel its impact. When she speaks, her words carry weight. When she serves, her actions exude calm authority. She no longer needs to prove herself. The anointing of God whispers through her like soft oil. What has happened in secret now supports her amid growing responsibilities. The pressure hasn't vanished, but it no longer feels threatening. She finally understands that what once seemed unbearable was, in reality, building her capacity. God trusted her with this heavy load because he had already prepared her to bear it. This revelation transforms how she steps forward. When the door finally opens, it isn't the moment she imagined. No adrenaline rush. No triumphant arrival fueled by ego. Instead, she feels an acute awareness. The greatest work was done before this very moment. The silence shaped her far more than any opportunity ever could. The waiting once seen as stagnation now reveals itself as intentional preparation. Returning to visibility feels strange and new. She is keenly aware of how cautious her heart has become. The noise grows louder. Attention intensifies. Expectations press down with real weight. Yet something within remains anchored. She's not stepping into the spotlight to be seen, but to serve. And that difference matters profoundly. A brief tension grips her as she adjusts. Old temptations whisper once more. Validation tries to lure her back, but now she recognizes the danger and stands firm. The desert taught her discernment in profound ways. She understands all too well how swiftly visibility can overshadow the quiet foundations that silence carefully built. Because of this, she moves with intention, more deliberately. She listens attentively and remains firmly anchored in the private space where she was shaped. God watches her closely, not to test her talents, but to examine the condition of her heart. Promotion is not about immediate change. It reveals what preparation has produced over time. She carries humility gracefully, without shrinking away. She holds authority confidently, yet never arrogantly. Her confidence is calm and without fanfare. The door opening didn't make her ready. The hidden seasons did. What surfaces now is not a fragile blossom, but a deeply rooted presence. People may look and think she changed overnight, seeing only the moment and not the process. They applaud what took years to cultivate. She doesn't correct their assumptions or feel the need to explain. She knows the truth deeply. Every unseen prayer whispered in solitude, every quiet loss borne privately, every season filled with doubt, all of these shape the woman standing here today. God builds chosen women in the silence, crafting their strength and character so that when the spotlight finally shines, it does not consume or destroy them. Roots must come before fruit. Depth always precedes display. That door opening is not the miracle itself. It's the unfolding of what has been carefully becoming for years. Because of this, she can step forward boldly without losing herself to the noise once again. Through every silent season, every unanswered prayer, each waiting moment and pruning pain, God has been at work. What you witness now, the doors opening, the opportunities flowing in, is not the start of transformation. It's the continuation of a sacred process that began in quiet, unseen moments. The woman God shapes in silence develops roots so deep that storms cannot shake her, voices cannot sway her, and applause does not define her. Take a moment to reflect. What hidden season are you in right now? What is God doing within you that the world does not see? If this message resonates with your heart, share your thoughts below or pass it on to someone who needs this truth. And don't stop here. Watch the next story, where God continues to move invisibly, shaping what will someday shine brightly